Every crime is a wound on the world. We're here to dissect it, layer by layer, to find the truth buried within. This is Anatomy of Crime. The high desert of New Mexico holds a particular kind of silence. It is not an absence of sound, but a presence of stillness, a vast watchful quiet that stretches from the Sandia Mountains, which glow like watermelon-colored embers at sunset, to the flat, pale expanse of the West Mesa. In this landscape, stories can get lost easily, swallowed by the enormity of the sky and the dust of the earth. In September of 1999, that silence descended upon the Stardust Apartments on Montgomery Boulevard in Albuquerque. It crept into apartment 309, a space once filled with the hopes of a young woman who had traveled halfway around the world for a new life. Her name was Girly Chew Hossencofft, and on the morning of September 10th, she was gone. The first sign that something was profoundly wrong was a simple, mundane detail of modern life. A missed day of work. Girly was a bank teller at the local Bank of America, known for her meticulous reliability and her bright, infectious smile that could disarm even the most difficult customer. She wasn't just an employee. She was a vibrant part of the workplace fabric. So, when she failed to arrive for her shift, her coworker and close friend, Barbara Obiso, felt an immediate prickle of professional and personal unease. Calls to Girly's apartment went unanswered, each unanswered ring amplifying the growing sense of dread. By that afternoon, the dread had coalesced into action. Barbara and Girly's new boyfriend, a man named John Mallory, stood outside her apartment door, knocking, then pounding, calling her name into the unnerving quiet. When the apartment manager finally unlocked the door and let them in, the scene that greeted them was one of sterile ambiguity. The apartment was clean, disturbingly, unnaturally clean. There was no sign of Girly, no note, no indication of where she might have gone. Her purse and keys were missing, as was her car, a white Mercury Tracer. It could have been a spontaneous trip, a sudden departure to clear her head from a stressful divorce. But the air was thick with a sense of wrongness, a lingering echo of violence that no amount of cleaning could erase. Something felt scoured, both physically and spiritually. The normal, comfortable clutter of a person's life had been wiped away. When Albuquerque police officers arrived, that feeling began to take tangible form. They had the trained eyes to see what panicked friends could not. They saw the faint, almost imperceptible stains on the beige carpet of the bedroom, marks that someone had tried to scrub away. They noticed a small, dark spatter on the bed's dust ruffle, a tiny punctuation mark in a story of violence. It was enough. The investigators brought out the luminol, a chemical that, to the naked eye, looks like water, but in the dark, it tells secrets. It reacts with the iron in hemoglobin, causing blood to fluoresce with an eerie, supernatural blue-green light. As they sprayed the chemical throughout the apartment and turned off the lights, the room was transformed. The ordinary bedroom bloomed with a ghostly luminescence. A silent scream made visible. The bedroom carpet, the mattress, the walls, all lit up in ghastly patterns, revealing the ghost of a brutal, desperate struggle. Someone had not just been attacked in this room. They had been subjected to a frenzy of violence, bleeding profusely, and the perpetrator had then gone to extraordinary, painstaking lengths to scrub the evidence from existence. Girly Chew Hossencofft hadn't just left. She had been viciously, violently taken. The investigation that followed would unravel a story so bizarre, so steeped in calculated cruelty and weaponized delusion, that it would strain the imagination of even the most seasoned detectives. It was a case that would feature a brilliant, charismatic conman who was a walking black hole of identity, a lovelorn accomplice who believed she was fighting in a secret intergalactic war, and a motive rooted not in money or jealousy, but in a shared fantasy of alien queens, reptilian bloodlines, and the salvation of planet Earth. This was not just a story of a marriage gone wrong. It was the story of a reality being unmade, twisted, and used as a weapon. Today, on Anatomy of Crime, we dissect the anatomy of a conspiracy, one fueled not by the common vices of greed or passion, but by a delusional cosmology that turned fantasy into a motive for murder. We will explore how a master manipulator built a false universe for his follower, twisting her belief into a weapon, and how that shared psychosis led to the violent erasure of a woman whose only crime was wanting to be free. This is the story of the murder of Girly Chew Hossencofft. To understand the vortex of madness that consumed Girly Chew, you must first understand the two opposing forces at its center: Girly herself, a woman defined by her optimism and quiet determination, and the man who would become her husband, a man who was not one person, but a legion of carefully constructed lies. Girly Chew was born in Malaysia in 1963, a world away from the sun-baked plains of New Mexico. She was described by her family as a joyful, somewhat sheltered, but deeply resilient person. She was a dancer, and through dance, she expressed a grace and discipline that would define her life. Her dreams, however, were larger than her hometown. She was captivated by the promise of the United States, a place she viewed through the lens of Hollywood movies and popular culture as a land of boundless opportunity and excitement. In her early 30s, she took a brave leap, immigrating to America, leaving behind the familiar embrace of her family and culture for the great unknown. She was vivacious and social, and despite the challenges of navigating a new country, she made friends easily. She threw herself into her new life, eventually finding work as a bank teller in Albuquerque. It wasn't a glamorous job, but it was steady, and it was hers. She was building a life piece by piece on her own terms, finding a community and a sense of belonging thousands of miles from home. In 1991, during a visit to the Del Mar racetrack in Southern California, she met a man who seemed to be the personification of the American dream she had been chasing. He was handsome, intelligent, and exuded an almost hypnotic charm. He introduced himself as Dr. Girly Hossencofft, a brilliant geneticist and thoracic surgeon who was on the verge of curing cancer. He spoke with authority and passion, claiming to hold multiple PhDs, to be an expert in biochemistry, and to be independently wealthy from his groundbreaking research and a series of lucrative patents. He was, by his own account, a genius who was saving the world. For Girly, a woman new to the country and eager for a life partner, he must have seemed like a miracle, a perfect man who had seemingly stepped right out of a fantasy. The man she met, however, was a phantom. His real name was Armand Daniel Chavez, and his life was a testament to the art of the con. Born and raised in Texas, he was a high school dropout with a genius-level IQ and a personality completely devoid of empathy or conscience. There were no PhDs, no medical degrees, no groundbreaking research. His entire persona was a meticulously crafted fiction. Throughout his life, he had been a grifter, a pathological liar who supported himself through a series of elaborate scams, often targeting vulnerable women. His signature con, one he deployed with chilling success, was faking terminal cancer. He had a deep, almost academic knowledge of medicine, gleaned from textbooks he studied obsessively. He would use this knowledge to mimic the symptoms of leukemia, using makeup to create a sickly pallor, starving himself to lose weight, and even inserting shunts into his own chest to complete the illusion of a man undergoing aggressive chemotherapy. This performance of suffering was a powerful tool, eliciting sympathy and financial support from a string of unsuspecting girlfriends and wives who believed they were caring for a dying hero. He was a chameleon, a void who filled himself with the identities he believed would best serve his needs. He was a master of psychological manipulation, possessing an uncanny ability to read people's deepest desires and insecurities, and reflect back to them a perfect, irresistible image of what they wanted most. For Girly, he was the successful, brilliant protector she longed for. They embarked on a whirlwind romance, and in 1993 they were married. For a time it seemed Girly had found her storybook ending. Deceit moved her to Albuquerque, where he claimed he was setting up a new, state-of-the-art medical research facility. He was controlling, but in the early days of their marriage, it likely felt like protectiveness. He discouraged her from making too many friends, subtly isolating her from a support system that might begin to question his fantastic stories. He managed all the finances, giving her a small, humiliating allowance, reinforcing her complete dependence on him. He was building a cage, but he was decorating it like a castle. But the facade of the perfect husband, built on a foundation of lies, was destined to crumble. The brilliant scientist was rarely in his lab. The immense wealth he claimed to have never fully materialized. His stories grew more elaborate, more grandiose, and more contradictory. He became increasingly domineering and verbally abusive, his temper flashing at the slightest provocation. The protector became the tormentor. Girly discovered he was having numerous affairs, lavishing gifts and attention on other women while keeping her on a tight financial leash. The dream had curdled into a suffocating nightmare. She confided in her few close friends that she was terrified of him, that his anger was escalating, and that she felt utterly trapped in a gilded cage. He had promised her the world and given her a prison. By 1999, after 6 years of marriage, Girly had found the courage to leave. She had secretly saved up some money, found her own apartment, and filed for divorce. This act of independence was a profound existential threat to Girly Hossencofft. A divorce meant discovery. It meant depositions, financial disclosures, and sworn testimony under oath. It meant the entire fraudulent architecture of his life was at risk of collapsing under legal scrutiny. His lies about his career, his education, his finances, all would be exposed under the harsh, unforgiving light of a courtroom. He had controlled Girly for years, and now she was not only escaping his control, but was poised to become the instrument of his complete unmasking. For a malignant narcissist and a pathological liar like Deceit, this was an intolerable scenario. He couldn't allow his greatest creation, and so he decided that it was not his identity that had to be eliminated, but Girly. But Deceit was a man who preferred to operate from the shadows. He was a puppet master, not a foot soldier. He needed a tool, an accomplice who would not only help him commit the murder, but would believe in its absolute righteousness. He needed someone he could manipulate as completely as he had once manipulated Girly. He found that person in a woman named Linda Henning. Linda Henning was a successful fashion designer, an intelligent and creative woman who, by all outward appearances, was grounded and stable. But beneath the surface, she harbored a deep fascination with the esoteric and the paranormal. She was a fervent follower of New Age beliefs, deeply immersed in the lore of UFOs, alien abductions, and government conspiracies. She was, in her own way, searching for a grander narrative, a hidden truth behind the mundane curtain of everyday reality. In the summer of 1999, she met Girly Hossencofft, and he didn't just offer her a grander narrative, he offered her a starring role in it. To Linda, he didn't just present himself as a doctor, he presented himself as a warrior in a secret cosmic battle. He confirmed all her deepest suspicions about the world. He told her he was not just a geneticist, but a member of a clandestine fraternity of scientists fighting a shadow war against hostile alien forces that had infiltrated the highest levels of society, and the leader of those forces on Earth, the most dangerous enemy of humanity, was, he claimed, his wife, Girly. In one of the most bizarre and sinister acts of psychological manipulation imaginable, Girly convinced Linda Henning that Girly Chew Hossencofft was not human. He told her that Girly was a reptilian queen, an alien from the Draconian Empire masquerading in human form. He wove a complex mythology, telling Linda that he himself was part of an ancient, noble bloodline of alien hybrids bred to be the protectors of Earth. He claimed Girly, in her reptilian form, was using her dark powers to drain his life force, to sabotage his world-saving research, and to pave the way for a full-scale invasion of Earth. He wasn't proposing a murder. He was recruiting her for a mission to save the planet. He told her Girly didn't need to be killed. She needed to be beamed up, or sent back to her home dimension. The extreme violence he was planning was reframed as a necessary act of cosmic justice and exorcism of a planetary demon. It is a difficult thing to comprehend how an intelligent, functioning adult could be brought to believe such a fantastical tale. The psychological phenomenon known as a shared psychotic disorder offers a partial explanation. It's a rare condition in which a delusion is transmitted from one individual to another. Typically, a dominant person who holds the primary delusion is able to impose it upon a more submissive or susceptible individual. Girly, with his supreme confidence, his deep knowledge of esoteric lore, and his hypnotic charisma, was the perfect dominant figure. Linda, with her pre-existing interest in the paranormal and her apparent emotional vulnerability, was the perfect recipient. He didn't create her beliefs from scratch. He found the fertile soil of her existing worldview and planted his own poisonous seed within it. He became the hero in her story, and Girly became the villain. Linda fell deeply in love with him, and her love and her belief became inextricably intertwined. To prove her love and loyalty, she had to join his crusade. She had to help him vanquish the Reptilian Queen. With his accomplice secured and thoroughly indoctrinated, Girly began to plan the practical steps of Girly's removal. The motive was now twofold. On a practical level, he needed to prevent Girly from exposing him in divorce court. On a psychological level, he had created a narrative that justified her murder, transforming a selfish criminal act into a heroic world-saving mission in the eyes of his co-conspirator. The stage was set for the night of September 9, 1999. The initial investigation into Girly's disappearance quickly and correctly focused on her estranged husband. It was standard procedure in any missing person case involving a couple in a contentious divorce. But Girly Hossencofft's behavior was anything but standard. When detectives first questioned him, he was unnervingly calm, almost theatrically detached. He portrayed himself as a concerned, albeit wronged, husband. He launched into a calculated smear campaign, painting Girly as promiscuous, mentally unstable, and prone to dramatic disappearances. He suggested she had likely run off with one of her many lovers, a man he could only identify as Tony. It was a classic tactic of a domestic abuser. Discredit the victim, control the narrative. He provided what seemed like a solid alibi. He claimed he had been in Charleston, South Carolina, on the night Girly vanished, attending a medical conference. But his story, like everything else about him, was a carefully constructed illusion. While investigators were beginning the arduous process of entangling Diazian's web of lies, they began to look at those closest to him. The name Linda Henning soon surfaced. Friends of Girly knew she was the other woman, the one Diazian was seeing while still married. When police interviewed Henning, her demeanor was a stark contrast to Diazian's cool detachment. She was nervous, defensive, and her story was riddled with inconsistencies. She admitted to her affair with Diazian, but denied any knowledge of Girly's whereabouts, and it was a physical piece of evidence discovered by chance that would tear a hole in her story. A few days after Girly's disappearance, a road worker, clearing brush along a remote stretch of mesa west of Albuquerque, discovered a bundle of items that had been hastily discarded. It was a collection of Girly's personal effects, her clothing, her ID, her bank cards, all rolled up in a dirty green tarp. The discovery was a grim confirmation that Girly had met with foul play, but the tarp itself would prove to be the Rosetta Stone of the investigation. Forensic analysts from the Albuquerque Police Department examined it meticulously, finding traces of blood and human hair. More importantly, they found a small piece of tape stuck to it, a price tag from a local Lowe's hardware store. This single, mundane piece of tape allowed investigators to trace the tarp's point of purchase. They pulled the store's surveillance footage from the days leading up to Girly's disappearance and hit the jackpot. The grainy video showed Linda Henning buying that exact type of tarp, along with shovels, work gloves, and other supplies, just days before Girly vanished. Suddenly, Linda Henning was not just the other woman. She was a prime suspect who had lied to police about her activities. Armed with this new, explosive evidence, police obtained a search warrant for Henning's home. What they found inside was a treasure trove of damning evidence that connected the dots of the conspiracy. In her laundry, they found a pair of jeans stained with blood. DNA testing would later confirm, unequivocally, that it was Girly Hossencofft's blood. The search also uncovered a collection of martial arts weapons and swords. One of them, a Japanese-style ninja sword, was missing from its sheath. The sheath itself was found in the trunk of Linda's car. While the sword was never conclusively identified as the murder weapon, its presence, combined with the bloody clothes, painted a dark and violent picture. Most damning of all, they found Diazian's day planner, in which he had written a chillingly casual entry for September 9th, the day of the murder. Pick up Girly. The evidence against Linda Henning was mounting, becoming an avalanche. But the case against Diazian, the mastermind, was still circumstantial. He was, according to his travel records, in another state, and he had an alibi. The prosecution needed a witness, someone on the inside who could shatter that alibi and connect Diazian directly to the planning and execution of the crime. They found that witness in a man named Bill Miller. Bill Miller was a friend and associate of Diazian Hossencofft. Like so many others, he had been taken in by Diazian's charisma and his fantastic tales of adventure and intrigue. Diazian had told Miller he was a paid assassin, a secret agent working for a shadowy government agency. When Diazian approached him with a proposition, Miller was intrigued and flattered. Deceit asked Miller to help him scare his estranged wife. He fed Miller a sanitized story that Girly was involved in shady dealings and needed to be frightened into leaving town. He offered Miller $5,000 for his help. Miller, believing it was just an intimidation tactic and caught up in Deceit's cloak and dagger fantasy, agreed. When confronted by police, Miller's conscience, or perhaps his instinct for self-preservation, won out. He confessed everything. He told investigators that he and Deceit had planned the abduction together. They had purchased supplies, including duct tape and stun guns. But on the night of September 9th, as they staked out Girly's apartment, Miller's nerve failed him. He told police that he saw Linda Henning arrive, dressed in dark clothing, looking like a caricature of a ninja, and meet with Deceit. At that moment, Miller claimed, the reality of what was about to happen hit him. This wasn't a game. He backed out, leaving Deceit and Linda to carry out their plan alone. Miller's testimony was the linchpin. It shattered Deceit's alibi and placed him at the scene, actively orchestrating the crime. He wasn't in Charleston. He was in Albuquerque, waiting in the shadows of the Stardust Apartments. Cell phone records would later corroborate this, with cell tower pings placing Deceit's phone in New Mexico on the night of the murder. He had flown to South Carolina immediately after, a deliberate and calculated move to create the illusion of distance. The conspiracy was now laid bare. Deceit was the architect, Linda Henning was the instrument, and Bill Miller was the witness who could bring the whole horrific structure crashing down. In October 1999, Deceit Hossencofft and Linda Henning were arrested and charged with the murder of Girly Chew Hossencofft. Despite the mountain of evidence against them, the blood, the tarp, the surveillance video, the witness testimony, one crucial element was still missing: Girly's body. The vast, unforgiving landscape of the New Mexico desert had swallowed her whole, and without her remains, the prosecution faced the difficult legal challenge of trying a nobody murder case. The legal proceedings began, and the state decided to try Linda Henning first. Her trial, which started in the fall of 2002, was a spectacle that descended into high drama and bizarre theater. The prosecution, led by Paul Spears, laid out its case methodically, presenting the forensic evidence piece by piece. They showed the jury the surveillance video of Linda buying the tarp and shovels. They presented the DNA evidence from the blood on her jeans, and they put their star witness, Bill Miller, on the stand to recount the details of the conspiracy. They painted Linda as a willing and active participant, a woman so blinded by her love for a con man and her own outlandish beliefs that she was prepared to kidnap and kill for him. They argued that her stories about reptilian aliens were not a sign of legal insanity, but a convenient and self-serving justification for a cold-blooded murder motivated by simple, ugly jealousy. Linda Henning's defense team, led by Gary Mitchell, was faced with an almost impossible task. Their strategy was to portray her as the second victim of Deceit Hossencofft, a victim of profound psychological manipulation and brainwashing. They argued that she was not a killer, but a pawn, a deeply disturbed woman who had lost her grip on reality under the spell of a sociopathic puppet master. To bolster this claim, they made a high-stakes and ultimately catastrophic gamble. They put Linda Henning on the stand to testify in her own defense. It was a decision that sealed her fate. On the stand, Linda did not come across as a sympathetic victim. Instead, she came across as utterly and completely disconnected from reality. She spoke at length, and with unnerving conviction, about her esoteric beliefs. She told the jury about seeing auras, about her telepathic abilities, and about the secret war between humans and reptilians. She recounted Diazian's stories about Girly being an alien queen, not as a delusion he had forced upon her, but as a plausible reality she had investigated herself. She insisted that on the night of the murder she was at a coffee shop, and that she had later been abducted by mysterious men in a white van, drugged and framed for the crime as part of a vast government conspiracy to silence her. Her testimony was rambling, paranoid, and completely unbelievable. Rather than convincing the jury she was a brainwashed victim, she convinced them she was either a pathological liar or profoundly disturbed, and in either case, fully capable of the crime she was accused of. The jury deliberated for 2 days. On October 18, 2002, they returned with their verdict. Linda Henning was found guilty on all counts, including first-degree murder, kidnapping, conspiracy to commit kidnapping, and multiple counts of tampering with evidence. She was sentenced to 73 years in prison. As the verdict was read, she showed little emotion, a final testament to her complete detachment from the gravity of her actions. With Linda Henning convicted, all eyes turned to the mastermind, Girly Hossencofft. His trial was scheduled to begin in January 2003. He had watched Linda's trial from his jail cell, had seen the mountain of evidence and the devastating power of Bill Miller's testimony. He knew that the same evidence would be used against him, and with the added weight of his long and sordid history of fraud and manipulation, his chances of acquittal were non-existent. The prosecution was seeking the death penalty, a very real possibility in a crime this brutal and calculated. Faced with this reality, Diazian did what he had always done. He manipulated the situation to his best advantage. He decided to cut a deal. In a stunning move, he offered to plead guilty to the murder of his wife in exchange for the prosecution taking the death penalty off the table. But the deal came with a crucial condition, a final, desperate plea from the prosecution and Girly's family. He had to lead investigators to Girly's body. He had to give her a proper burial. He had to provide the one thing that had been missing all along: closure. Girly Hossencofft agreed. He was sentenced to life in prison, plus 60 years for related charges. Then, shackled and under heavy guard, he was taken out into the desert he had used to hide his crime. He led a team of investigators, FBI agents and forensic anthropologists, to a remote area near the Magdalena Mountains, a desolate and rugged landscape of rock and scrub brush about 2 hours south of Albuquerque. For days, they searched under the relentless New Mexico sun, using cadaver dogs and ground-penetrating radar, following Diazian's vague and often contradictory directions. He would point to a ridge, a wash, a cluster of rocks, claiming that was the spot. But each excavation, each careful sifting of the dry earth, yielded nothing. He offered a cascade of excuses. He claimed the terrain had been altered by monsoon floods, that his memory was clouded by the trauma of the event, that he simply couldn't find the exact location. The investigators grew increasingly frustrated and skeptical. Was he truly unable to remember, his mind addled by years of his own lies, or was this his final, cruelest con? Was he deliberately leading them on a wild goose chase, reveling in one last act of control over the legal system, over Girly's grieving family, and over the woman whose life he had stolen? The search was eventually called off. It was fruitless. Girly Hossencofft had either forgotten where he buried his wife, or he had no intention of ever telling. The conspiracy was over. The perpetrators were behind bars. Linda Henning, the disciple, was left to serve her sentence in a New Mexico prison, perhaps still clinging to the bizarre reality her lover had crafted for her. Bill Miller, the reluctant witness, received a sentence of 4.5 years for his role in the conspiracy, and Girly Hossencofft, the architect of it all, was locked away, his life of lies finally contained within the concrete walls of a maximum security prison. But the silence of the high desert still held its secret. Girly Chew Hossencofft was never found. Her body remains lost somewhere in that vast, indifferent landscape, her final resting place a mystery. In the end, the conviction of Girly Hossencofft and Linda Henning brought a form of legal justice, but it left behind a profound and unsettling question. How does a belief system, no matter how bizarre, become the engine for such brutal violence? The anatomy of this particular crime is not found in the blood spatter or the forensic evidence, but in the dark corridors of the human mind, in the space where delusion and reality blur into an indistinguishable and deadly fog. This was a murder born from a shared psychosis. Girly Hossencofft did not merely recruit an accomplice, he cultivated a follower. He didn't just need help disposing of a body, he needed someone to believe, with all her heart, that the body wasn't truly human. He constructed a bespoke mythology, a private universe with its own rules, its own heroes, and its own villains. He cast himself as the savior of mankind and his wife as a cosmic threat. This narrative accomplished two critical goals for a psychopath like him. First, it provided a moral justification for an otherwise monstrous act, transforming a sordid domestic murder into a noble, even necessary, battle in a galactic war. It allowed him to maintain his grandiose self-image as a hero, even as he was plotting a brutal crime. Second, it bound Linda Henning to him with a loyalty that transcended simple love or greed. She became a co-conspirator, not just in a crime, but in a reality. Her belief was the key that unlocked her capacity for violence. She was not just killing her lover's wife, she was helping to save the world from a reptilian queen. The case serves as a chilling testament to the power of charismatic psychopaths to warp the perceptions of others, and to the terrifying fragility of the human mind when confronted with a sufficiently compelling lie. Girly's greatest con was not faking cancer or impersonating a doctor. It was convincing another person to adopt his madness as her own, to see the world through his distorted lens, and to mistake murder for salvation. He erased Girly Chew from the world, first by ending her life, and then by trying to rewrite the very definition of who and what she was, transforming her from a vibrant, loving woman into a malevolent, alien entity in the mind of his accomplice. Girly Hossencofft's final act of control was not the murder itself, but the secret he took with him, leaving Girly Chew's final resting place known only to the vast, silent desert and the darkness of his own mind. This has been Anatomy of Crime, where the truth is never simple, but always worth seeking.